Okay. So this is part 2 of my presentation on utilitarianism, and this will go into a variety of problems associated with utilitarianism, or at least arguments that people have made against utilitarianism being an acceptable theory of ethics. And just to kind of remind ourselves what utilitarianism is all about, it's focusing on happiness, right, to maximize happiness, but then also to minimize suffering. So from among our available options, we should always do whatever will maximize happiness and minimize suffering to the greatest extent that we can. Okay, so bouncing down then here to the potential problems. And one of the most common ways that people have tried to argue against utilitarianism is to come up with some kind of a scenario, some situation where it seems like there's a sort of an intuitively correct answer about what is sort of the ethically good or ethically right action for us to take. But the idea is that utilitarianism is telling us to do something different than what intuitively is the ethically correct thing to be doing. Okay, so here's a real sort of famous one. When I read about these ones, I think of sort of 80s teen movies where you know, you have sort of the nerdy kid who maybe doesn't have any friends, but then the cool kids give the nerdy kid kind of a makeover and pretend as if they're accepting the nerdy kid into their friend group. And so the lonely kid, the nerdy kid, believes that now they have all of these friends. And so they are made happier. But it turns out that the cool kids are just lying to the nerdy kid, to the lonely kid. And they're only pretending to be the lonely kid's friend in order to entertain themselves. And so intuitively, this seems really wrong, right? That they're being a false friend. They're lying to this person about being their friend. But according to utilitarianism, we should really only be focusing on the happiness and the suffering that results from this. And so the lonely person's happiness goes up because they feel like they now have friends. Their suffering goes down because they're not lonely anymore. The happiness of the cool group of kids, their happiness goes up. So it doesn't seem like there's anything wrong here. So that's one consideration. Notice, of course, that this is a key component, and you can probably guess why in terms of utilitarianism, why it's important that nobody ever finds out. Because if people find out, then, especially if the lonely kid finds out, the previously lonely kid finds out, then they will realize that it was all a joke on them, and their suffering will go way up, their happiness will go way down, and then from the point of view of utilitarianism, something bad has happened. But if the previously lonely kid never finds out, then it seems like utilitarianism says that there's nothing wrong, and maybe this is even a good thing that's been happening. Okay, so that might seem like maybe not that big of an ethical issue, but here's probably the most famous, at least one of the most famous scenarios that have been brought up as a counterexample to utilitarianism, the organ harvesting example. So there's a person who's admitted to the hospital for a very minor and routine surgery, something like an appendectomy that's been done, you know, thousands and thousands of times. So there's really no reason to worry about your getting bad outcomes. If you're a relatively healthy, relatively young patient going in for this kind of a surgery, you usually have nothing really to worry about. But as the scenario goes, the surgical staff realizes that there's five other people in this hospital who need organ transplants. And it turns out that they all need different organs. You know, one person needs a heart, another one needs lungs, another one needs liver, another one needs kidneys, and so on. And luckily, it turns out that this person that's gone in for the routine surgery is a compatible donor to all five of those people. So the surgical staff thinks to themselves, what if this person that is getting this minor routine surgery were to suffer sort of an unfortunate little accident during surgery. You know, it happens even if for procedures that have something like a 99.5% success rate, well, there's still that 0.5% that doesn't work out, you know, so sometimes accidents happen and it's tragic. But if that happens, then we'll be able to use this person's organs to save 5 other people. So they go ahead and kill this patient that's in there for the minor surgery, and they use his organs to save 5 other people. So they harvested his organs. And again, nobody finds out. So it seems like, according to utilitarianism, yeah, we have 1 person dying, so that's bad. But he's dead, and he was under anesthesia, so he doesn't suffer. But it does cut off his potential for any happiness that he could have felt later in life. And then his family and friends, assuming he has any, they would be suffering emotionally as a result of this, maybe financially too, as a result of this person dying. But we have 5 other families that are now happy that their loved one now has an organ, a new organ to solve whatever problem that they were having, and so they're going to survive. And so now we've got 5 separate survivors and 5 separate families that are made happy by this. Their suffering goes down, their happiness goes up, versus just 1 person dead. 5 is greater than 1, so it seems like we've increased happiness appropriately here. And utilitarianism might have trouble finding sort of what's supposed to be so wrong about this. It might even say that this is a positively good thing to be doing. But of course, intuitively, this is murder, right? Like the doctors just murdered this person. And so intuitively, this seems like an ethically terrible thing to do. So that's why this is meant to be a counterexample to utilitarianism. Well, I'll mention a couple more here. This is a famous one too, punishing the innocent. So, you know, it's usually set up as like you're a small town sheriff and some terrible crime has happened in the town, and the townsfolk believe that there's this one person who committed the crime. And so they are demanding justice, right? They're demanding that this person be held accountable for their crime. And, you know, since this is sort of old-timey kind of small town place, the idea is that like maybe this person is going to be executed sort of relatively quickly for having committed this crime. But you, as the official authority in the town, you know that this person that's being accused is actually innocent. But you can't really convince the mob, right? You can't convince the townsfolk because they're just so worked up over this. They're so convinced that this innocent person is actually the one who committed the crime. And so they're demanding justice right now. And you recognize that if you deny them that justice, you deny them the opportunity to, you know, maybe hang this person or whatever other method of execution they're planning, that the townsfolk will riot, they might burn down the town, suffering in the town will skyrocket, happiness will plummet, it'll be really horrible. So you run through your utilitarian calculations and you think, well, maybe we should go ahead and punish this innocent person in order to satisfy the mob. Yes, this one person will suffer, but all things considered, this is the best option for maximizing total happiness and minimizing total suffering in the town. And yeah, you're punishing an innocent person, but who cares? As long as you're maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering, that's the way to go. Okay, so, and again, of course, this is intuitively the wrong thing. We should not be punishing innocent people, especially when it's like the death penalty that we're imposing on an innocent person. So the idea is, it seems like utilitarianism has got it wrong in this case. Okay, one more, gladiatorial games. I'll just say this one quickly. The idea is you force people to fight. Maybe they fight a wild animal or they fight each other. Yes, the gladiators themselves, you know, the people that are forced to do this, especially if they're forced, they're suffering. But the idea is we've got this huge crowd that are made very happy by this. And so the cumulative happiness of the crowd far outweighs any suffering on the part of the gladiators. So again, it seems like utilitarianism says that maybe this is the right thing to do, or at least can't really show that this is clearly the wrong thing to do. But intuitively, we want to say that forcing people to fight in gladiatorial games for our amusement is wrong, that this is a bad thing. Okay, so, oh, actually one more, kind of mentioned this last one, the voyeur example is another common one that's brought up in utilitarianism, that a peeping Tom or whatever you want to call it, somebody that's violating the privacy of other people. And the person that's the voyeur that's violating people's privacy, they get a lot of happiness out of this for some reason. And the people that he's spying on, they never find out, right? They don't know that somebody's looking in through their windows or looking at them through a telescope or whatever it is. And so they don't feel any suffering as a result of this. And the voyeur is made happy. So again, this intuitively seems like something wrong is going on, but utilitarianism seems to have trouble pinpointing exactly what's supposed to be wrong about this. Well, a common feature here is that utilitarianism seems to be ignoring the rights of people. So in the voyeur example, it's privacy rights. In the other examples, it's the right to life, right? They're being murdered in most of those other cases. Or in the false friend example, if we were to identify any kind of right, it might be something like the right to not be lied to. And so that draws out one of these concerning features of utilitarianism, that it doesn't seem to have a way to incorporate rights. Because rights are all about what we can or cannot do. They're about actions, whereas utilitarianism famously is about consequences. And so it doesn't really matter how you get to those consequences, what acts you perform to get to those consequences, as long as the consequences are good. As long as the consequences are good, then you're okay, according to theories like utilitarianism. But violating somebody's rights, intuitively, we say that that would be really bad. But since that's just an action along the way to achieving what seem like good consequences, utilitarianism seems to not really care whether you violate somebody's rights or not. Okay, so maybe we should say just a little bit in the utilitarian's defense here, that most of these examples are maybe a little too fanciful, that in reality, for example, in the organ harvesting case, the chances of people finding out one way or the other are really high. Like, it's almost impossible to keep that kind of a thing truly a secret. And if people find out, then confidence in the medical community and confidence in particular in that hospital and that surgical staff, confidence in them goes way down. So people are less likely to seek medical help. So their suffering goes up, happiness goes down. So really, this is a terrible thing to do according to utilitarianism. So it seems like then the utilitarian would say that it gets it right. Utilitarianism gets it right. Do not murder your patients and harvest their organs. So yay, they got it right in that case. And same thing for some of the others, right? That the false friend example, they're probably going to find out. And that's how those teen movies always end, right? At the end of the second act, right? The nerdy person always finds out that they've been lied to, and it all comes crashing down, and suffering goes up, happiness goes down. So it seems like under realistic circumstances, not so much that the teen movies are realistic, but like if somebody were to try to do this in real life, it'd be almost impossible to keep it really a secret. And so in the long run, it would actually be a bad thing, both intuitively and according to utilitarianism. So it seems like utilitarianism maybe is not so threatened by some of these examples. And in the other ones, so like the voyeur example or the punishing the innocent example, they might then argue that there actually are other options. So like the gladiatorial games one, there might be other options to making all of these people happy that does not involve people getting slaughtered and being forced to fight wild animals or something. So we've got these other things that do an even better job of increasing happiness and reducing suffering. Okay, so one of the other moves that is sometimes made in utilitarianism to try to accommodate this problem of ignoring rights is to move to what's called rule utilitarianism. According to rule utilitarianism, we should be following specific rules that when we follow those rules, we will end up maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering. Right? So here's a good rule: don't murder your patients. So that's a good rule because when we follow that rule, when surgeons follow those rules, they will, by and large, tend to increase happiness and reduce suffering. So even if there's some specific case where it looks like maybe you can increase happiness and reduce suffering by murdering one of your patients, you shouldn't do that because the rule that's been established is don't murder your patients. So that sounds promising, but there's a further problem here. Because remember, utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory. And so if you're establishing sort of firm rules like this, well, now it's a rule-following theory, right? More of what we call a deontological theory that focuses on the actions, and certain actions are considered right and wrong. And you don't worry about the consequences, you just make sure you're following the right rules so that the actions you're performing are right. And so if this is the route that seems promising, well, then maybe what we really should do is move to a deontological theory and just abandon a consequentialist theory. If the consequences are being, focusing exclusively on the consequences is turning out to be problematic, then we should stop considering ourselves to be consequentialists, right? And move to a theory that focuses on actions and has rules, or like a Kantian theory, perhaps. So this is sort of the problem with the move to rule utilitarianism that has become sort of famous in the literature on this topic. Okay, one other way that people will kind of go after utilitarianism is they might try to think of something else besides happiness that really has intrinsic value. Because famously, utilitarianism says that the only thing with positive intrinsic value is happiness. We might think that there's a lot of other things that are valuable, but those other things are really only valuable insofar as they lead to happiness. If they don't lead to happiness, says the utilitarian, then those things aren't valuable. And even if they do lead to happiness, those other things are not intrinsically valuable, they're only extrinsically valuable. Remember, they're only valuable insofar as they lead to happiness. So another way to perhaps criticize utilitarianism is to think of other things that might be intrinsically valuable. And you could probably think of a variety of possibilities, but ones that often come up are things like love, or just life itself might be intrinsically valuable. Even if life is not going to lead to happiness, and in fact, you're pretty sure that your life is going to lead to quite a lot of suffering, nevertheless, you might still think that your life is valuable. And if that's the case, then it seems like your life is intrinsically valuable, because it's not valuable because it's leading to happiness, because there might be plenty of times where it's not going to lead to happiness, where really you just got a lot of suffering ahead of you. But still you're not willing to give up your life because you still find value there. And so that value must be something that's independent of happiness. Another candidate that's sometimes considered is freedom. Some people might think that freedom is intrinsically valuable and that they might be willing to give up quite a lot of happiness in order to achieve or maintain their freedom. And if that's the case, then just like the previous example with life, then that means that they consider freedom itself to be valuable, independent of any happiness that might result from that freedom. In fact, there might be a lot of suffering that results from that freedom, but nevertheless, people might want to still keep that freedom. And so that could be intrinsically valuable. And if so, then that would cause problems for one of these fundamental basis of utilitarianism, that happiness is the only thing that's intrinsically valuable. Okay, utilitarianism is one of the best known theories of ethics these days. So there's just mountains and mountains of literature on this. And the debate goes on and on and on and on over all these examples and more. But I think that gives you sort of a good flavor for the debate overall. So I will go ahead and stop there. Thanks.